Morning, everybody. Hope you're all okay. Would you be able to keep your eye on the time for me? Because what I'm about to deliver normally takes about 2.5 hours. So try and squeeze it into 10 minutes might be a bit tricky. Just before we do start, I'm just going to take a quick selfie, if that's all right. Because nobody believe I'd get all this many people in one room talking about GDPR, so I'll say cheese. Cheese. But on a serious note, I should have asked your permission for that first. Is anybody in here would not like me to share that on social media? If there is, put your hand up and let me know. It's a hot topic. So GDPR is essentially about data privacy and about EU citizens' rights. So as it says on there, I'm Chris Hunter from HM Network. We are communications specialists, if nothing else. We basically help businesses connect to their consumers, to their customers and their supply chains. We do things like wide area networks, lease lines, telephony. But we also started about 12 months ago, something called the GDPRexpress. The idea behind it was, when we first got made aware about GDPR, about January last year, there was nothing going on in the Northwest. Nobody knew anything about it. There's a couple of events popping up in London, just general awareness events, and they were charging like £500 a head to get into it. So when we started asking businesses in the Northwest, what are you doing about GDPR, they all looked at us like we had two heads. So we thought, right, well, on our own preparations, we're going to start documenting what we're doing as an SME, helping other SMEs in the Northwest get to grips with what's needed, and also provide them a variety of training and support options if they needed it. So as it says here, today's 15-minute session won't make you an expert. Sorry if you thought it would. It is going to be a very, very high-level overview, but hopefully, by the time you leave, you might know a little bit more than when you first arrived. There's also a very good chance that you might have more questions than when you first came in as well. So, quick show of hands, who knows what the DPA is? Data Protection Act? Out from 1998, okay, obviously things have moved on a little bit since then. Back in 1998, hardly anybody spent an awful lot of time on the internet. eBay just pretty much started, as had Yahoo. Moving forward to about 2000, 2001, a lot more social media accounts and profiles popped up like LinkedIn. Gmail, Google, all that sort of stuff. And in 2003, something called PECR came along. Does anyone know what PECR is? It's a privacy and electronic communication regulation. It's basically the ground rules for marketing, for email, for faxes, for SMS, and any electronic communications. So who knows what this is? Who knows what the GDPR is? Who knows what it stands for? Okay, it stands for the General Data Protection Regulation. It actually got brought out in 2006, in April 2016. It gets brought into law on the 25th of May of this year. And it's a massive game changer. It's the biggest change to data protection in an entire generation. And the aim of it is to pretty much give rights back to individuals in Europe, no matter where the businesses are that are dealing with people's data, even if they're in America or in Australia. If it's EU citizens' data that they're handling, they need to make sure that they're keeping it nice and safe and secure. So the aim of our events that we run is to share our own experiences and help other businesses make the right steps to getting ready. To talk about some practical advice and guidance, rather than saying the law says you must do this, you must do that. Well, how the hell do you implement it? You know, it's nice to be able to talk to other people that are actually going through it. To put privacy into context, to help other businesses get onto target, to provide support options for all. Like I said before, there's a lot of events popping up, and there's a lot of specialists coming out of the woodwork saying, oh yeah, we can come and do an assessment, it's 10 grand. I'm sorry, but small businesses can't afford that sort of money, so we made sure we found an awful lot of support that can help businesses no matter what their budgets are. As it says there, we brought together a range of support, including audits and assessments, training services, including a lot of face-to-face stuff. We also do a variety of e-learning, so if a business is struggling to take people out of a sales floor, for example, or of a warehouse for the day to do some training, we can basically give them e-learning so they can do it 5 minutes before they start the job in the morning. They watch a little video, do a little quiz, and over 2 or 3 weeks, you've done like 15, 20 modules, and it all starts to make sense. And we also aim to make GDPR easier to grasp and convenient to educate staff. Yeah, essentially, the GDPRexpress is a variety of businesses that came together to help businesses from multi-angles when it comes to data privacy. We put together a series of toolkits based on the ICO's own toolkits. You know what the ICO is, don't you? The Information Commissioner's Office. Okay, cool. So they're the people that are going to be enforcing the GDPR, and they're actually in the news quite a lot recently. I'll touch on that in a minute. We also work with an IT hardware recycling company from Padium, who can come and collect old hardware and destroy it safely. Just out of interest, when anyone's got end-of-life computers at the moment, what happens to it? Do you just flog it? Do you sell it on eBay? Do you give it to the kids? Chuck it in the tip? Does anyone actually get it recycled properly and get the hard drives crushed? Because we can be doing all the right things when it comes to firewalls and staff training, but if you've then got a computer with a load of personal information on it, and you're selling it in the LEP or on eBay for 15 quid and somebody's got all that data, that's potentially a data breach. So again, we do e-learning, a variety of practical support and workshops. In fact, after I leave here today, I'm going over to Edge Hill because we're doing some projects with Edge Hill to provide some half-day and one-day workshops for businesses. We work with a variety of data protection practitioners, cybersecurity specialists, penetration testers, social engineers, and again, we can help with things like assessments and staff training and an awful lot more. There's about 26 days left until GDPR gets implemented. Has anyone in this room not started doing anything about it yet? Nobody's going to judge you, but if you've not, just put your hand up and say, I've not even looked at it yet. All right, you're all doing something about it, which is good. In our own preparation, we've spent about 700 hours on our own internal preparations when it comes to GDPR, finding suitable services for our own use, but also sharing those services that we can help other businesses get up to speed with it. And again, for businesses from sole traders right the way up to multinationals. There's a lot of scaremongering going on with GDPR, which is the wrong way to address it. Yes, there are much higher fines involved for getting things wrong, but it's not all doom and gloom. It's actually an opportunity to help instill customer confidence and also with your supply chain. So under the current Data Protection Act, if you have a breach at the moment, there's a maximum fine. Does anyone know what the current fines are? Up to £500,000, yeah. So if you get things wrong and you accidentally email somebody with some personal data from somewhere else, depending on the severity, you can actually get fined up to £500,000. There was a scenario a few weeks ago, actually, where SSEs at an energy company, they emailed one customer somebody else's account details and name by mistake, and they got fined £1,000 on one email. So yeah, it is big business. So when the GDPR comes along, those fines are changing from up to £500,000 to up to £17 million, 20 million euros, or 4% of your global turnover. And again, the severity of the fines and the correctional measures will be dependent on what's gone wrong. So the GDPR actually provides more rights to EU and UK citizens, and it's all about personal data. What's personal data, you might ask? It could be all sorts, from your name, your address, even me taking your image on that selfie. That's personal data, that's your image. There's other classifications of data as well, like special information, which can include things like ethnic origin, sexual orientation, national insurance number, health records, things like that. So these are things that really need to be taken care of. Currently, if you have a breach of personal data records, if you lose more than 100 standard records, you have to raise a breach notification to the ICO if there's a risk of harm coming to those people. If that data is encrypted and it goes to the wrong place by mistake, like in an Excel document, for example, and you've sent it to Dave M instead of Dave D, if it's an encrypted document that you have to password protect and you can't get into it, you don't have to raise a breach notification. Under special data, which includes things like we said before, like medical records, if you lose one piece of special data, and there's risk of harm coming to that individual, you have to raise a breach notification to the ICO within 72 hours. So there's two words that come up an awful lot within the GDPR, accountability and transparency. If you're a business collecting and processing personal data and things go belly up, you need to be accountable as to what's happened. And you also need to be transparent about what happens to people's data. Has anyone seen the news recently, the story about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook? Okay, so there's no secret that that's only come to light recently to the public in order to make GDPR more aware. That's been investigated for about 18 months so far. I was aware of that when that first started kicking off. But for those of people that don't know anything about that story, Cambridge Analytica were a company based out of Cambridge, as you would imagine. They basically wrote an application for an iPad that would work out what your traits were, what your mental being was like. And they basically went out into the street to 50,000 people and said, right, would you mind just doing this quick survey on this iPad? A lot of people went, yeah, I want to know, what my mind says about me. So they went in, they put their own Facebook credentials in there, and it basically gave them a report saying, you like this, you don't like that, this is what turns you on, this is what switches you off. But what Cambridge Analytica weren't telling people is the fact that every time you logged into it, it was crawling through to about 300 of your Facebook friends. So every Facebook user has an average of about 300 followers. So 50,000 people times 300, times 300, times 300, times 300, quickly became about 80 million people. So that information was actually used as part of the Trump campaign, and that helped President Trump get elected, because a lot of the things that people were putting as fears started to appear in their social timeline. So if people were scared of snakes, for example, social media campaigns were appearing in their timeline saying that Hillary Clinton is a snake and trying to turn people off against things like that. It was also partly responsible for the Brexit result as well. Who remembers when this got introduced in about 1992? I used to work in a bar. My dad used to run a pub actually in Preston called the Adelphi. I used to work on the bar and I used to help out in the kitchen as well. And I remember when this sort of came to light, a lot of small businesses, and especially things like roadside cafes, were going, this is just regulation that's going to put small businesses out of business. Nobody can afford to take time to become clean and make sure we're showing people how clean we are. But the reality is, if we're out in the town on a Friday or Saturday night these days, and we've had a few scoops, we go to a couple of takeaways and they're both selling a kebab for £5 at the end of the street. One of them's got 1 star, one of them's got 5 stars. Which of those takeaways do you go to? You go to the one that's showing 5 stars because they're showing that they take health and safety seriously. And I think it's exactly the same with GDPR. And I wouldn't be surprised in the next couple of years, once people start getting spot checks and people start getting investigated, they'll start issuing some sort of badge scheme that shows how compliant you are. In fact, this is very timely actually, because the Lancashire Evening Post do an annual report about all the takeaways, certainly in Preston where I come from, and they show the takeaways that have got all these different ratings, and the reality is any of the takeaways that got 0s and 1s, they quickly go bust. So if you're able to demonstrate to your customer base and your supply chain that you're taking data privacy seriously, you're going to instill confidence in them. If they come to you and say, what are you doing about GDPR, and you say, what the hell is GDPR, they're going to look for different suppliers. So what's changed? So data processors have increased obligations and liabilities. There's 2 phrases that come up again quite a lot: data processors and data controllers. If you're a data controller, you're a business that collects data and makes a decision on that data. If you're a data processor, you've normally been handed that information from a data controller, literally to do things like mail campaigns and stuff like that. Under the current regulations, if a data controller drops the ball or a data processor drops the ball on behalf of the controller, it's the controller that's liable for those up to £500,000 fines. With regards to GDPR, data processors and controllers have equal liability for the data that they hold. So data controllers are required to be more accountable for the data that they hold in the process. Consent requirements are a lot more strict compared to how they have been previously. How many of you got websites that have got contact forms on? I'm guessing probably quite a lot of you. Previously, there's been a bit of a bad practice where people have had pre-ticked consent boxes saying, by using our service, you are opting into our mailing list, you are opting into this and that. You can't do that. You've not actually ever been able to do that. And the GDPR is making people change it so that you've got to give clear and unambiguous consent to say, I'm agreeing to SMS, I have to physically tick it. I'm agreeing to emails, I have to physically tick it. And even if you're saying you're sharing it with third-party businesses, you have to be very clear as to who those third parties are. You can't just say, we may share. You must say, we are sharing with X, Y, and Z. There's also much stringent regulations on the transfer of data outside of the EU. Our website's hosted by WordPress, it's built on WordPress, and it's actually hosted in the EU. We've made sure of that. But when it was first built, it was hosted in America. Now that's outside of the EU. A lot of WordPress websites have contact forms like Contact Form 7 or Ninja Kicks, things like that. A lot of these free applications that people put into websites and free plugins, the reason things are free is because you become the product or it's a cut-down version. So if you're collecting customers' details on your website, and it's an Indian-provided plugin or it's a Russian-provided plugin, you can imagine where the data might be going. So if anyone's got plugins that are all over the place, please have a look into where data's stored. Again, we touched on before about the notification of breach requirements within 72 hours. And that's within you finding out about it. If you ever do have a breach and you don't raise a breach notification on purpose and the ICO get wind of it, there'd be a lot less lenient on you than if you go to them and say, right, we've dropped the ball, there's been an incident, we're dealing with it, we've got a process to deal with it. As we said before, there's fines up to 17 million quid or 4% of global turnover. Last year there was an incident with TalkTalk, don't know if anyone's aware of that. They'd actually had 3 data breaches of personal customer data. And on the 3rd occasion, the ICO, right, you're taking the P now, we need to come down on you, right, there's correctional measures been imposed, you've not dealt with them. They got fined £400,000 for losing 163,000 customer records. 16,000 of those are credit cards or bank details with them. If that was under the new regulation, that would have been closer to 78 million quid, which is a massive difference. So it's basically going to be headline fines to try and make people get their act in place. So documenting processes, this is absolutely vital within GDPR. If you're ever doing things like mail campaigns, having something called a process and activity log, so knowing where the data's come from, whether you've got the relevant consent, who's dealt with it. So if anything does ever come back saying there's been a breach or there's been somebody complaining that received emails that they never consented to, you can pinpoint to where it's come from. You also need to be evidencing staff awareness and training. It's absolutely essential. Quick show of hands, who gives staff training on data protection at the minute? Anyone? Cybersecurity, anyone? If you do, can you evidence it? Can you say that Joe Bloggs did the training on this date and this was the pass rate? It's one thing saying, well, we gave somebody a PDF to read, but if they've never read it and they're just going, yeah, I've signed it, I've looked at it, that's no good, is it? You need to be able to show people why it's important that they do all this sort of stuff. And speaking of the e-learning that we were talking about before, we partnered with a business over in Sheffield called Bob's Business. They actually make training quite fun. And you sit there and you want to watch the next module because it is quite engaging. But I'll show you this quick module anyway.
GDPR takes effect from 25th of May 2018. Organisations processing EU data must be compliant with the new regulation. So you might be wondering, what exactly is the GDPR? This new regulation is aimed at making data protection consistent across Europe and strengthening the protections for how personal information is processed. GDPR is important because it gives individuals more control over their data and clarifies what organisations must do to safeguard these rights. With the increased data protection measures come stricter penalties for breaking these regulations, making it vital that data is processed securely. Regardless of Brexit, GDPR will apply to not only the UK, but the whole of the EU and any global company that holds data on EU citizens. Bob's Business has an e-learning solution that provides a comprehensive overview on the changes affecting organisations when GDPR becomes legislation. Your employees will understand the legislative changes and their roles and responsibilities under GDPR. With a full suite of specially designed animated modules, we make sure that the learning isn't just engaging, but positively impacts employee behaviour. Don't wait until it's too late. Take steps to protect your business now with Bob's Business.
So I've just been informed that my time's drawing to a close. We've tried to squeeze in what we can. Has anyone seen this before, the 12 steps to compliance? If you've not, I've got a load of printouts down here, also with our contact details on. There's also a variety of infographics that help different businesses and different sectors make the relevant changes. Again, if you want to contact me, we've got absolutely tons of information for people. So I've been Chris Hunter from HM Network and the GDPRexpress. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you later.